What was the craziest way your partner cheated on you? Story 1. She demanded to read all the messages on my phone. I said no problem, but only if I could read the messages on hers. She had forgotten to delete a message from a guy saying, "All we ever do is f***. Can't we hang out sometime?" There was nothing on my phone. Story 2. Date night canceled day of. I decided to make it a guy's night to see the new Marvel movie at the time. As we entered, I saw her sitting in the theater snuggling up with a guy. Our seats were a few rows back, and I saw them kiss a couple times. When we all left at the end of the movie, they were exiting their aisle as we walked down the stairs. She absolutely froze when she saw me. Blocked her on everything while I'm in parking lot. Story 3. Met a girl through work, not a co-worker, got her number, and when we first talked she said she just went through a breakup and didn't want to jump into anything. So I played it cool. After a few weeks we started hanging out and hooking up every day. Really liked her and our connection was great. After 8 months I was like, okay, this is a thing. I was on vacation, we were talking on the phone, and the idea of us still being just friends was naturally brought up by her in a teasing way, like her saying, "Come on, we're more than that." I told her with a smile on my face that we should talk about that when I get home. Then she went quiet, hardly answered my texts the rest of my trip, gave no explanation, didn't want to hang out when I got back. I was so confused. I don't have social media, but in my desperate confusion I made a Facebook in 5 minutes and looked her up. She had never broken up with the previous guy. She lived with him, cheated on both of us for 8 months straight. Story 4. Not up, but crazy enough, my ex's stepdad found out through FB Messenger because his phone broke and was using her phone at the time we were in high school. They had this jank old phone with no cell service that she used to talk to me and the other and since it wasn't hooked up, she had to use FB Messenger to talk to us. He was getting pings on his phone from them talking. He called me the next morning telling me what happened. She also called me a little while after crying. I then wasted another year with her thinking she'd change. Nah, just got cheated on for more times and now I have trust issues. Story 5. I was visiting a dying relative in hospital so could not attend some stupid college party he and his roommate organized. I told him I couldn't go and asked him if he could come over later after visiting hours in the hospital because I knew my relative would die soon and I really just needed someone to be there with me. He said he probably wouldn't be able to, as he needed to help his roommate with party preparations, but would come over later if they finish early. Next day I saw pictures of him with his ex in his lap kissing, uploaded the previous night by his roommate. The roommate even knew we were dating. He was just too drunk to realize he added me as a friend a week earlier on Facebook and I would see the pictures. Story 6. A friend of mine in college made a best friend in a similar way. She had this awful frat boyfriend and she dropped by his frat house one day to see him and found him in bed with another woman. She started yelling at him and the other woman said, "Wait, this is your boyfriend?" Which she confirmed and then the both were yelling at him, left together and became best friends and neither spoke to him again. Story 7. Not really wild, but my ex-wife and I owned a small business together. One day I noticed a strange email address on the office computer, her first name and a different last name. I realized that the email was still logged in, so I took a peek. I found 2 years worth of emails between my ex and some dude she dated before me, so I printed out every email and had it bound in a binder ready to present to my divorce lawyer. Story 8. Came home off a deployment. Now ex-wife was acting really weird, but I figured it was because I had been gone for a year and everything was just taking time to get acquainted. About 3 days after I returned, I had a notice from my unit stating my vehicle had 3 tickets at another base we were in Germany a few hours away in the past few months. When I went in to find out what the deal was, all 3 had photos attached to them for speeding through a checkpoint. All 3 had my wife and some other guy. She was kissing him in the third pic. He was driving my car. Story 9. On my birthday I was with my girlfriend and I passed out early since I had a long shift that day and I had to drive 2 hours to get to her place. Woke up in the middle of the night, went outside to get a smoke, saw her fucking her ex in his car on the parking lot. First, she was like a deer in headlights, as was I basically as well. Then she started to cry and apologizing profoundly as I was packing my shit and leaving. Told me that it was a mistake, she loves me, and that he got her some food, and one thing led to another. Told her that's a very interesting way of showing her love to me on my birthday. Story 10. I went on a 2-week holiday, and when I returned he was acting really strange. I tried to ask him what was wrong and why he was acting off. He started an argument with me, told me I was too young and insecure, asked me to leave, and didn't want to see me again. I left sobbing, totally confused. 9 months later, I see him walking through the city with his ex and a newborn baby. Now I understand. Story 11. I had just gotten home for 3 weeks during summer holidays. I hadn't been home or seen my wife for a few weeks, so I was excited to get home. It was on Saturday night, and I could sense she was awake into the small hours on her phone. I never thought anything of it, as I'd never had a reason to not trust her. At 4:30 a.m. she got up out of bed and said she was going to pick her brother up from a party. COVID lockdown had just ended, so everyone was partying. We have 2 young kids, so we didn't go out. She comes home just over an hour later and jumps into bed wearing sexy underwear, which was the opposite of what she went to bed wearing. Married men will understand. I woke up with the kids at 7 and the whole situation didn't sit right with me. I took the dash cam footage from the car and loaded it onto the computer. There it was, clear as day. Some dude who did not look like her brother at all was thankful she came to pick him up, and they flirted in the car for a bit before dropping him off at his house. It was difficult to watch, but when I confronted her, she broke down and confessed. 2 weeks later, and the car was sold. 6 weeks after that, the house was sold. A year later, and they divorced. It was a tough point of my life, but thank God for that dash cam. Saved me wasting more time of my life with a woman that didn't value me as much as I valued her. I've now moved on with an absolutely fantastic woman, and I have my life back, but better. Story 12. Your story reminded me of a past ex. Her female friend was a photographer, and she had a very intimate photo session with her. Not nude, but pretty damn close. She had told me about this beforehand, and I wasn't really for it. The style of the shoot was not really my taste. They were trashy IMO, but I wasn't going to stop her. She got very upset when I questioned what they were for if they weren't for her current lover. Turns out they were for her ex, who she was seeing on and off for our entire relationship. Story 13. My entire friend group knew about it, and I only found out after the one real homie blackmailed her into admitting it. And when she did, it was the most insincere shit ever. It's no big deal, everyone else thinks it's okay, and stuff like that. Suffice to say, I got my ass out of that relationship and friendship group real quick. Story 14. She didn't realize that her iPhone messages were also synchronized to her Mac, which I was using to stream movies on. I saw text popping up with her writing to her ex about how she loved taking his load on her face. I just packed up my shit and left. Story 15. He told himself. He randomly called me saying why I messaged his ex, and I was super confused because I never did, and told him it's a misunderstanding so I can reach out to her to explain it's not me. He got super defensive and threatened if I reached out to her we're done. I found it odd and reached out to clear my name, and she spilled saying he's been cheating on me as well as playing her and multiple other girls all at the same time. Turns out one of the girls made a fake account of me and reached out to her. Never found out who it was, but this is the one time I'm glad having a stalker worked in my favor, otherwise I would have never known. Story 16. His sister kept calling me Annie, and my name is Andy, short for Andrea. I corrected her a few times, but I didn't care for her at all, so after that I ignored her since I thought she was trying to be obnoxious. We only saw her once a week or so. Then I found out after almost a year that he was cheating. Only I was the mistress because he had been with Annie for 3 years and they had a child together. I still don't know if his sister was calling me Annie to laugh behind my back or to make him uncomfortable, both. It must have been hilarious to her anyway. He used to drive my car all the time, and one day I was out running errands and came out of the store to find a woman with her toddler standing by the car. I asked her if I could help her and she said, "No, I'm just trying to find out what store my boyfriend is in. This is his car." So yeah, we both learned a lot that day. We hung out all day together comparing stories of times he was unreachable. Then we confronted him together. He walked into her apartment and sat down on the couch with a beer before noticing I was standing there with her in the kitchen. He said nothing, just put the beer down, got up and left, ignoring both of us as we peppered him with questions. This was about 13 years ago and I haven't spoken to him since. She stayed with him. She was 6 months pregnant the day I met her or found out about her. Story 17. My colleague had an elaborate wedding cathedral ceremony, hundreds of guests to a guy she'd been with for years. She found out shortly afterwards he'd been cheating because they met this girl who was his colleague and gym buddy when they were walking in the park, and their two French bulldogs who were noisy and protective didn't bark at her at all. There was no reason for her to have met the dogs before, as she had never been to their house to her knowledge. So she snooped on his phone while he was asleep, and apparently he had been cheating for over a year and she was pregnant, and they were opening a business together and he was leaving as soon as he had the whole thing set up. When the dust settled, the only thing she was pissed off about was the expense they and her parents had spent on the wedding. He could have called the whole thing off and saved thousands. She didn't learn though. Her second wedding was nearly as elaborate. Story 18. I was out with this girl I'd been with for a few months, went to a nice restaurant for dinner and stopped at a local dive later to hang with mutual friends and coworkers. I went into the men's room later to see her legs under a stall and heard a coworker's voice saying, "Suck that dick." Left the bathroom, went directly to bartender and had her split our check and paid mine and bounced like Tigger. Game over. My dumb ass loved her. Story 19. We broke up and then her best friend and best friend's husband told me that night. She had been few different people but settled on one. They got married, had kids, then she cheated on him with me one night years later. I didn't know they were together. They divorced, she remarried, got divorced, and now she is on husband number 3. My favorite part is that she portrays herself as an amazing Christian woman that is better than everyone because she is so Christian. Story 20. I was out at a bar with some friends when I started talking to the people next to me. They were wearing our town's local social sports club shirt, so I asked them if they knew my wife, who was in the club. They responded with, "Yeah, I know her. I hear she is cheating on her douchebag husband." I then replied, "I am her husband," and ran out the bar crying. Story 21. Had one of those catching up phone calls with a girl I used to be good friends with. Told her all about my girlfriend during the conversation. The next day, I'm supposed to see my girlfriend and she cancels on me. No big deal. A couple hours later, my old friend starts texting me asking me questions about my girlfriend. She ends up telling me she's pretty sure my girlfriend is in the back seat of a car with her and that my girls have been all over her boyfriend's brother and they're all on their way to the movies now. I try calling her and texting to confront her. She calls me back and breaks up with me. The cherry on top is my girlfriend and I work together, and the guy she's cheating with is my manager. She ends up quitting not long after, but I have to work with this guy for another year before I change jobs. Lol. Story 22. She basically moved him into our house. She told me it was to monitor him because he was depressed and needed help. Apparently tried to off himself by swallowing a bedsheet. I then realized that the whole depressed and needs help line was what she would use over any guy she was being suspicious with. Like the one guy that she had history with, who made a move on her while we were together and kept coming back into her life when he was depressed. Or the guy mentioned in the shredded note I found in her nightstand talking about how she wanted to run away with him and get a surprise divorce. Or the guy that she had this weird fixation with role-playing Khaleesi and Khal Drogo within online chats. All depressed, all needed her help. Once it clicked, I was done. Story 23. I had a long day at work and went to meet my husband at a bar for one drink at closing time. He had recently put a bunch of his paintings on display there. When I arrived at the bar, he was drinking in a booth with two women, one young and one old. I walked over, took a big drink of his beer, introduced myself as his wife, and thanked them for coming to his art show. Cue looks of shock and confusion. It turns out he was on a date with his girlfriend and was meeting her mom for the first time. In hindsight, I find it hilarious, but I can't get the look the mom gave me out of my head. A perfect mixture of shock and curiosity. with a little bit of disgust. She realized before I did what was going on. Story 24. The Honda app on your car's screen gives you a most recently visited place overview that connects to your Google. I went away for basic and AIT, and at the end of basic training, when we got our phones back for an extended time, it gave me the most visited places. It was another apartment complex I didn't recognize, but Google Maps had a picture of his car there. He had emotionally cheated before, so I kinda knew because none of my friends had mentioned living there, and it would be getting there at 7 or 8 p.m. and then leaving for his classes in the morning for school without going back to our apartment 2x a week. Story 25. My fire alarm woke me up when it was low on batteries at 5 a.m. and thought it was strange that my girlfriend wasn't home, yet she was out drinking with her friend. I tried to call her, but she didn't answer. That's when I remembered that we had the friend's spare key. She lived in the house next door, so I went to check, and my girlfriend was sleeping in her friend's bed with some guy. If the fire alarm didn't wake me, I think I wouldn't have ever known. Story 26. I was clearing internet history or personal data off my work laptop before I turned it in as I was leaving for a new job. I remembered that my now ex-wife had used my laptop for some freelance work, so I went in and cleared out the information on her Google profile as well. Unbeknownst to her, Google profiles track data across any device you use. That's how I found out my ex-wife was moonlighting as a cam girl while I was working. I confronted her, she confessed, but I knew there had to be more. Exactly a week later, she came home from a doctor's appointment. She had chlamydia, which she didn't get from me. She tried to justify it by saying monogamy didn't work for her. It sure as hell worked for me. That's why she's my ex-wife. Story 27. We'd been married a couple of months, had a gut feel that something was going on, and checked her phone when she was in the shower, which I'd never done before. Yep, she was ex for the previous few months. Said nothing, just passed her phone to her in the shower with messages open. Then came the begging. All her belongings were out on the footpath an hour later. Never heard from her again until I had to get divorce papers signed. Hardest day, but probably best day of my life. Don't cheat. It's not that hard. Story 28. Not particularly wild perhaps, but I was at work in a cubicle type of setup. A coworker or friend sat next to me and was browsing Tinder when she suddenly shrieked and screamed my name, but when I peeked into her cubicle, she was acting weird, like a deer in the headlights expression, and hiding her phone. As you might have guessed, she came across my husband's profile, and it was very clear that it was not an old or outdated profile. I left work immediately and drove to the middle school where he teaches to confront him. I can yada yada over this part because nothing really notable happened. No students were in the classroom because it was a planning period, and he just denied everything. I packed up my that same day and never looked back. Found out that he had been doing this ever since we were dating. We were both in grad school, and he would tell me he had a night class, but never actually went to a class. Story 29. Got home from work one day and noticed my then girlfriend had cleaned out her purse before going to work and left a couple small things on the bed. We would frequent the movies, so I thought nothing of it when I saw a ticket stub. I figured I would look a little closer out of a fond curiosity. When I discovered it was actually from the night before when she was out getting dinner with one of her girlfriends, turns out she went to see a movie that we had plans to see that coming weekend with her ex. Story 30. When I was 14 and just got my life approved to move to the other end of the state for my dad's new job, I was searching through his briefcase in hopes of finding and taxing one of his cigarettes. I was a kid. Instead, I found a whole pack of developed photos of him and some woman not my mom in multiple positions having sex. There was also an A4-sized handwritten song he'd written to the gist of "Everything I have I want you and nothing else." I was literally shocked. I found my older sister and just shoved it all in her face so she could see what had taken away my ability to verbalize what my problem was. Poor thing, I didn't mean to share the trauma. Long story short, we decided to tell my aunt, my mom's sister, so she could break it to my mother, as neither of us had the heart to directly tell mom or the spine to confront our dad. Plus, I was in the wrong for being a human being for rifling through his things to begin with. That event really messed with me for years, issues with trust or men or self-esteem, etc. My parents split and divorced. I now have a sister 21 years younger than me, and my dad is still married to that woman. She's a bit of a bitch and not my cup of tea, but I've never mentioned knowing or seeing what I saw to any of them, so to this day only my siblings, not the half-sister, know.